Hello everyone, it is Jazz and welcome to episode 5 of the Jane Eyre project where I read retellings or different iterations or books related to Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. This month I am reading Mr. Rochester by Sarah Shoemaker. So this is a parallel novel from the perspective of the fabulous yet odd Mr. Rochester, of course.
Hello, it's Editing Jazz. So you're gonna get some updates from me because this was just the kind of vlog where I had to like pop in every once in a while because sometimes that happens. Also, in the editing room, I've realized that this is going to be a rather long video, and in order to make this more digestible, because this is very much a spoilery discussion type video, I have decided to time code you below in the description. So I've left some time codes. I tried to make my updates discussions for each section of the book. So there's 3 parts in the book. So there's 3 discussion sections. So there's a time code for each of those. There's a time code for my final thoughts on the book, which will be spoiler free. So if you just want my spoiler free thoughts and review on the book, that is down there below. And also there's a little time code for the little adventure where I went book shopping and my book haul for that. I will be popping in periodically and I hope you have fun.
Greetings, people. Check out my Audrey Hepburn cup. Isn't it cool? I'm gonna pack up my camera bag while I talk about the book because I'm going to go out and have some lunch with my mom, and we might go to an independent bookstore downtown and maybe to the record store or something like that. So it should be just like a fun day, but I wanted to take you guys with me. First thing I guess we should talk about is Edward's childhood, which is the section that I'm in at this moment. I have to say that I just want to give Edward Rochester just like a big old hug because it starts off and basically his mother died in childbirth when he was born, and I think because of that his father has chosen to basically ignore him.
You do very much in Jane Eyre get the idea that Mr. Rochester's father really messed him up, and the way this author interprets that is very, very intriguing, and I think it's a very weird relationship indeed because Edward's father sort of does this weird mixture of ignoring him and also over-controlling every detail of his life, and I think that would make someone have a few issues.
And then his brother Roland, who is like 8 years older than him in this book, he is really unpleasant. Glad that he hasn't been in too much of this 60 pages because I want to give him the 1-2 punch. I also like that this book is leading you, because it is starting with his childhood, is leaning more into Edward's positive qualities. He has a lot of positive qualities, but I think because he has had so much dysfunction in his upbringing, but it's really easy to lean into some of his problematic moment. This is kind of nice because you get to see like his innocence as a child and the things that make him really positive, his love of nature, his imagination, things like that. And those are also things that Jane likes, right? So I think it's nice that that is tied into this book. If you watched my Wide Sargasso Sea video, you know that the subject of the meaning of names in Jane Eyre and in that book is a really important topic, and how names are very much tied to your identity. The subject of names really does come up even in this story, which I think is a really interesting thing that ties all these Jane Eyre books together. Edward is, of course, sent off to school, or a school of sorts. It's more like a tutoring with a group of boys. The teacher there immediately gives you a nickname. You are not called by your normal name. You are called by a nickname. And I thought, you are like renamed. And every time he moves to a new situation in his life, he is renamed. You're reborn when you're given a different name. I also love that section with him going to school with the group of boys that he goes to school with, because they form this really endearing friendship, and Edward was such a lonely child up until then that it's so sweet for him to, you just want that for him. You want to see him have friendship. I also thought it was interesting that in some of his things with friendship that he does twist his ankle, and I thought it was intriguing that in Jane Eyre that's kind of how he meets Jane, as he falls off his horse and twists his ankle. And that in this story, when he experiences his first like moments of true friendship, he twists his ankle. So it's like a really nice parallel between the two stories. The book on the first page pretty much discusses how he was raised by nursemaids and governesses, and the subject of governesses and how they were sometimes bad and sometimes worse. I think it's really hilarious that he doesn't initially in his early life have a very favorable sort of association with governesses, and then he ends up marrying a governess. I'm gonna go on with my day, take you with me, and then hopefully I will get a little more reading of the book done. I'm back home in my normal update spot at Landmark, which is the independent bookstore that I went to. They had a buy two get one free sale, and it counted if you got at least one of the two books had to be secondhand books. So I got some secondhand books, some brand new books, some really cool editions of things, and now it's time to share my haul. I'm going to start with the secondhand books. So one is called The Wizard's Tie by Frederick Buckner. And this really cool copy of Sleeping Beauty with just really interesting illustrations. I believe that it has other stories in it as well. So there's all sorts of cool things in that. My mom picked out this because she likes to garden, so it's Gardens of the South. I know that I already own 2 copies of Jane Eyre. One is the illustrated edition, one is the edition that I read for this series, which was the Writer's Annotated edition, but I found these beautiful like floral editions of classics there. Found this Jane Eyre in that edition, and it is so beautiful. And I do not have Jane Eyre in hardcover. My excuse for this is that I had to get this for the video. I mean, it's the theme of the series. I found this really cool copy of Anne of Green Gables. This would be my 4th copy of Anne of Green Gables. I'm starting a collection of different editions of the series, and it has a little box that the actual book fits into, and the cover looks like this. And it's also illustrated with these wonderful little illustrations. There's Anne and Marilla. Now moving on to a collection of books that I've never read before, but I've always wanted to try. So I picked out The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. My mom picked out The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. I picked up Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway. And lastly, I picked up this edition of Don Quixote. I have always wanted to check out this story. The story has always intrigued me, but I always kind of forget about this classic for some reason. So I thought, since I could actually get it for free, that I would go ahead and pick this up. I'm going to go back to reading the book that you guys are here for. Finally, time for my update. Rochester has a couple of encounters with mental illness in this first section. If we didn't know how the story went already, those two events would be foreshadowing for his experiences with Bertha. I guess I could see how that would kind of help him not be as freaked out when he encounters that situation. So maybe that's why the author decided to include that. I also like that this section in which he goes to college talks about artifice and wearing masks and being sort of distanced from people, and using the fact of you kind of wearing like a mask for each different person can be a way of just keeping people at a distance, because in this section he suffers a lot of losses, one right after the other, and so he basically kind of creates this level of artifice about himself to keep people at bay, to kind of, I think, protect himself. And I think that's a really good thought, because in Jane Eyre, a lot of the themes in there are very much about Jane's dislike of artifice and how she really can't put up with that sort of nonsense. And so this is kind of showing how he gets to a place where he would be in a state of where he would create artifice around himself. And I think that's very nice that, like, she strips that down for him. I was trying to figure out what Edward's motif was, because Jane Eyre, bird motif, realized that it's possibly like father and brother figures, because he runs into various father figures and various brother-like figures, because he can't get that at home. He doesn't have a relationship really, or like a traditional relationship with his father, and he has a very negative, cold relationship with his brother. And so maybe the motif of this is the types of fatherhood that he experiences. I did come to a conclusion that I never really thought about until this book, and it's not saying that this is what Charlotte Bronte thought about Edward and his father's relationship, but I think it's something to add into your idea, or I like this author's interpretation of the backstory, is that Edward's need to please and seek approval of his father is more than just that his brother was the favorite and was supposed to inherit everything. I think that is definitely a factor from the way this book presented the relationship, especially in that first section, is that the only way Edward can experience something from his father that he interprets as love is that his father must want him to do well. He must want to care about him and make sure he is taken care of in his life. I honestly think that his father just has an agenda. There is definitely not a ton of care for his son, but I think his son, at that point in the story, really thinks that that is how his father is showing affection to him. I think that is part of his willingness to please, is he feels like that's the only way he can reciprocate what he interprets as his father's love. It's so sad. So I decided to refilm my discussion on part 2 because I had some other inklings way after the fact, like after sitting on this book for a while, but also I think I wasn't feeling particularly great on the day when I filmed that update, and
it is the section of the book where you kind of have to focus because it has the hardest topics to discuss in the book, being slavery and mental illness. I do think it's really important when going into part 2 to remember that this book is written from Edward Rochester's perspective. And the reason I say that in terms of the attachment to how he gets into the situations and what's going on with those two aforementioned topics is that I think that it's important to remember that as humans, we don't always take responsibility for every wrong act that we've done or every bad choice that we've made, or we don't want to admit to certain negative things that we've done. And I think that is a lot of the case sometimes in this section. He very much does consider himself the victim. And in a certain aspect, I definitely think he is a victim of manipulation and things in this section of the book. But there is a part, and I don't know how much of a part of him that does admit that, like, kind of getting involved in the marriage aspect of marrying Bertha is maybe sometimes partly his fault based on, like, his intention in getting into that situation and how he kind of based that on competitiveness with other men and his attraction to her rather than, like, real valid emotion. He still had options, regardless of the thing that I discussed about his people-pleasing sort of behavior. He could have made a different choice, you know what I mean? He obviously could have made better choices in terms of the slavery aspect of this section. So, little kind of thought is that slavery is illegal in England, but obviously in Jamaica it is not illegal yet. There are some uprisings and some things to sort of get rid of slavery, but it is still actively going on. And obviously, being the trash human that Edward Rochester's father is, he is 100% pro-slavery. There are some interesting concepts that are brought up, though, around that situation and some complex relationships that are brought up through that situation that I think are worth talking about. But really, the thing that I want to talk about in regards to Edward's kind of thoughts on slavery, I do feel like in Jane Eyre, he's very much not pro-slavery. But what's intriguing about this is that he's still not pro-slavery in this, but he's engaging in it because that's how his father has always run that business. And he makes a lot of intriguing statements about this. Basically that it really does corrupt him as a person to own people and engage in the abuse of those people. Whether he agrees with it or not, he is engaging in that act, and he does feel corrupted by it. Maybe that is why in sections of Jane Eyre, he's like, I have no interest in engaging in that again. But it should be noted that he doesn't actively try to stop it in any large way, though he does try to free some of the slaves that he has when the opportunity comes to do so. So I guess there's like a gray area when it comes to his viewpoint and his culpability in that situation. This is another situation where I say, remember, it's from his point of view, and he's not going to like totally admit to like all the things he has responsibility for. That's like one of those moments. The marriage between Antoinetta, Bertha Mason, and Edward Rochester. By the way, I'm just going to call her Bertha because that's what most people call her, and it's easy. But there is, yet again, not unlike White Sargasso Sea in this, a subject brought up about her name and what she should be called. I did think it was very intriguing that when they met, they mutually decided to call each other by their middle names. Like, way to go to put distance between each other before you're even married. Now, in terms of that marriage working out in the long run, I don't think it ever would have worked out, even if she hadn't become severely mentally ill because she's very much just into like parties and dances and doing like fun, frivolous things. And Edward in this book is represented as somebody that likes to talk about literature and deep intellectual thought. So I think that marriage would have had a hard time. When we talk about her mental illness, I have to admit that I was surprised at how quickly that became an issue. It really was kind of like not long after they were married. And I thought they were going to be married for a little longer before that became like an issue. But that became kind of an issue right at the beginning. And the thing about it is that she truly cannot help that that is a condition that she has. But it's very much represented in this that she is very abusive in the way she speaks to him and the way she treats him. Even though she can't help it, that is going to take some trauma on you mentally if you're experiencing that from your spouse. And to a certain extent, I guess I think at that point, did know that that could be a possibility, but I believe that he felt like that he could fix it. And I also believe that her family members also thought that somehow Edward was gonna like save the day and fix it. And I do think that they blame him for not being able to fix it for some reason, or at least her brother does, which makes me not his biggest fan. I also can see why Rochester is not his biggest fan, because he doesn't really contribute to anything. He's kind of super useless and he's a loser, and then he wants to blame him for everything. I'm like, no, Richard, that's not where we're going with that. What I found super fascinating though about this section in regards to that marriage is Bertha Mason's father's reasoning for it. Now, I do think on Edward's father's side that he was purely going for a monetary reason, another reason that we'll talk about in part 3, and then also a status and business reason. And he was purely being manipulative. Weirdly, I feel like there's another gray area here, because Bertha's father's intent is actually kind of good. He wanted her to marry Edward Rochester because he could see that he was like a young man that was responsible and willing to take on responsibility. And because his son Richard is not very useful in terms of business, and because he knows that Bertha is possibly going to be mentally ill because her mother, and I don't know if it's her older or younger brother, but she also has another brother that is in an asylum with her mother. And he, first of all, doesn't want her to be put in an asylum like her mother and her brother. So obviously she's going to have to be around somebody that's really responsible, not unlike Edward, that will be honorable enough to kind of hold up to a promise to do that. And secondly, he needs somebody that will be able to take responsibility over the business for Richard. And so he actually kind of has a really good, caring intent. It's just the way that he goes about it with the manipulativeness is not a good way, and he's throwing, somebody else's life under the bus. But it's intriguing to me that Edward Rochester's basically like, I'm kind of jealous because my father wouldn't care that much about me to set up something, regardless of how manipulative Mr. Mason goes about it. It is coming from a good place of like caring about his children. Lastly, I wanted to discuss Edward's experience with the death of his brother and father and how he ends up being the owner of his estate. The fact that like he gets this message that's like, oh, your father's died and you now have inherited the whole estate, and he has to go, wait, what happened to my brother? Like, the fact that you can't mail your own son a letter that says, oh, wait, your brother died. And then his father, I guess, was so depressed about that because he pinned all his hopes on that horrible older son that he raised to be trash just like him. He can't even send like a note that says, oh, your brother's dead to Edward. That's how little cares he gives. Another thing that was very intriguing about his father and brother dying was the fact that he felt such an odd feeling about it, but it seemed like such a valid feeling for the character, is that he was actually more sad that he wasn't sad. He never was very close with them and didn't really know them, and they didn't really treat each other particularly well in that family. So it's such an odd kind of layered emotion to feel sad that you don't feel sad about something. I like the nuanced nature of that feeling being explored. I believe that's all I have to say about part 2. It was a really layered, lots of morally gray sections in it, but also a lot of intriguing emotional relationships involved in it, not just with Bertha and her family, but also with other characters that were involved in that situation and his relationships with those people. And those are some of the most intriguing scenes in that section. I finished the book last night. Part 3 was like a gut punch followed by like a really solid, just adorable, sweet ending. A lot of this part 3 section has a lot of interesting explorations of the reasons why certain things are in place by the time we get into Jane Eyre, and I thought they were well thought out in terms of this. One of these things being the reason why Bertha is in the attic. So initially, when Edward sails home, he has her in that separate house, which is the house that he will eventually live in after Thornfield burns down at the end of Jane Eyre. And he has her living there. But the issue sort of becomes that she is continuously almost harming herself in there. There's like almost too much stimuli for her, and there are windows, and she's always like breaking through the windows and cutting herself and almost hurting herself. And the reason why she's placed in the attic is because it's darker, there's less stimuli, the windows are high up, so she can't harm herself with them. And then also kind of his reasoning why he ends up traveling the world. This is one of the sections in terms of the Slavery Act where he does really take more responsibility for his involvement in that, and like how it was a detriment to people's lives, because one of the really sad sections of this book is that he has brought with Bertha to care for her a woman and her daughter that were once slaves, and he says, okay, you'll be free in England if you come to England with me. And he brings them to England to take care of Bertha, and basically the little girl steps on a nail and gets tetanus. Oh my gosh, I cannot talk. And she ends up dying, and he feels like so much regret and like genuine regret about it, because he realized that he was manipulating them to even be there, and they never would have been there if not for him. Regret is the thing that kind of prompts him to kind of try to escape Thornfield and escape the situation, as he has to hide more things from people in his life. He just feels like he also is escaping this like regret of what he's done to other people. Before I dive in to his relationships that he explores over his world travel, I'm going to talk about how he goes on kind of like this rampage of excess. When I really thought about it, it's because he has never really had control over his own life. The whole book, his father has controlled every little detail of his life and what he's going to do. And he also, subsequent to that, has been basically being a person that takes responsibility for everybody and everything and has to clean up everybody's messes, and he is just weighed down by that responsibility. So when he gets an actual chance to like leave that, or he decides that he's going to escape that, he just goes wild. Not saying that he should have gone wild, but he goes. He's like, I'm gonna take my freedom that I have right now. But it turns out not to really be freedom, even though he thinks it is, because we're going to talk about his relationships with these women that he meets on there, specifically Celine, but he also, after the Celine thing blows up in his face, he ends up with all these women. And even when it comes to Blanche, and when he meets Blanche, there's this idea that, to quote Perks of Being a Wallflower, we accept the love we think we deserve. I think he feels like he's a garbage human, that he can't really be real with anybody because he has like the secret of Bertha and all that weighing down on him. And because of that, he ends up feeling like a ugly on the inside kind of person. And so he accepts love that is ugly love, if you will, being Celine and, you know, the several mistresses that he had, trying to just find someone to accept him for him, but you can't be accepted if you can't be real with people. And also when he does end up meeting Blanche, he says she is the type of woman that fit the man that I had become. So he feels like he has become this shallow, meaningless person that is really horrible. And thus, these are the types of people that he deserves. Subsequent things have happened over his world travels. He, of course, acquires Pilot, his dog, because by that point, y'all, this man needed the loyalty of a dog. Of course, getting Adele as his ward, which I never thought about this, but because Adele is orphaned and she ends up being cared for by basically a lady of ill repute, shall we say, basically he is really saving Adele. The factor that this woman that was currently taking care of her had no problem selling her to any man, even though she's like, what, 5 or 6 at this time? So he's basically like, even though she's not my child, I'm not going to let this child like grow up being a child trafficking situation. You know what I mean? And I think that really says something about, even though he thinks he's kind of trash at this point, he still has some really good qualities. But I've deviated from my point, which is that it's not until he meets Mrs. Fairfax and hires her, and she actually had some interaction with his mother. He reconnects with the idea of his mother, with his this painting of his mother that he's been hunting down the whole entire book, and he finds out that his mother was a really kind person. And I think at that point he realizes that what he deserves is somebody like his mother that is a kind person. Y'all, what I really need to talk about though is this B plot. Just when you think this family drama with the Bertha situation cannot get any more manipulative, Sarah Shoemaker is like, no, we're gonna make it worse. Roland apparently during his time when he decided to travel to Jamaica with his dad, got it on with Bertha when Bertha was like 13 years old. So not only that, she got pregnant with this illegitimate son, y'all. So basically Edward Rochester's father was just like, you know what, son Roland doesn't really want to marry your daughter, even though he got her pregnant. He just wants to peace out. But you know who you can have as her husband? My other son, Edward, that I don't care about. So they take her baby, give it away to like these people in America, and then all of a sudden in this section of the book, like 20-year-old illegitimate son, Gerald, is like, hey, I'm gonna come back. And he wreaks some havoc, y'all. It is implied somewhat in this novel that he is the one that started the fire that burned down Thord Field. It kind of takes the responsibility of that fire being set from Bertha, because it does make her look less like she's doing an act of vengeance, or that she's so mentally disturbed that she accidentally set this fire. It basically makes her kind of an innocent bystander in this situation, which I kind of like, but I don't know if everybody's gonna like that. That B-plot, I would say, does add a layer of having something different as part of the story and a point of interest that isn't something that you would see in the normal novel, which gives, you know, new events for the reader to read. And also in regards to some of the intentions of Edward Rochester, it does kind of make him look a little less bad. Still doing some not good stuff, but he does look a little better because of the situation that's kind of being built around this new character. Let's delve in to Rochester and Jane, because, oh, my heart.
This is probably just me being a Jane Eyre nerd, but I did enjoy the fact that the twisted ankle thing that I mentioned for part 1 actually does like have a purpose in this book, not just as symbolism. Because in the book earlier he does twist his ankle, it means that it's already previously injured, and thus that is why he has to like actually stay home and actually get to know Jane. I like that this author really does think about what foreshadowing would be for this book. So I thought that was just a really fun like element. And like I said, it could just be that I am a Jane Eyre dork and their meeting is a really interesting meeting, and so I like this kind of tied that in a nice bow.
His little game with Jane and the Blanche sister situation. Now, I do still stand by the fact that I said in the rereading of Jane Eyre video that he has, through like this learned behavior from, you know, the manipulativeness of people in his life, learned that to kind of gain a significant other, you have to get into doing all these games and all this elaborate, you know, subterfuge to make it happen. And I do still think that is a factor in this, but what this author brought forth as an interesting factor to why he decides to do this game is that he does discover that, of course, Jane is a governess. She relies on him for her monetary payment, and also that the world is going to view that as not the thing to do, and that also he's had that experience in the book where he's like, oh, you shouldn't take advantage of people that are, you know, relying on you in that way. And he really is, you know, no, I don't want to do that. So he's basically deciding to do all this stuff so that she will come to him instead of him going to her and being like, I want to be in a relationship. He wants her to say that to him so that he doesn't have to feel like he's taking advantage of her. Obviously, the way he's going about it is not good. And he does eventually realize that that was a bad play on his part, other than the lying about the wife situation. He, I think, didn't realize how much it hurts Jane. He was just thinking through a lens of, I want to, like, kind of make it so that we're more like equals, which that's a noble idea, but obviously could have gone about it in a better way. Could not take the last few pages. First of all, obviously she leaves, and that, like, was a sting. He, like, realizes a lot of things about himself and his approaches to things. It wasn't a full-on Bella Swan moment, but he definitely struggled. And then obviously his home burns down and he loses his hand and is blind. The thing about that was, like, really, like, my heart felt happy sad was that when stuff like that happens, you discover who your true friends are. And I think he discovered that he like had friends in people that he didn't know that he had. But when Jane comes back, it's so endearing because you have read this book and you know how much she truly means to him. I really loved that the follow-up to them being together is that he basically is like, we need to build a home not for status, but because we are going to be parents and we need to have like a home that has specific things that children can enjoy. And since the sort of motif for Edward is fatherhood and fathers, I thought it was really wonderful that that was what he was thinking, but also that these are two people that have never had true parents, and they're two people that are discussing how they're going to be better parents than like their life experience has shown. There's two people that are like that are discussing how they're going to be like these great parents, and it was like on top of that, the last line of this book just made my day, which is this. And there is Jane, my dearest heart, who walks with me and reads to me and talks and laughs with me and teases and sometimes slides down the banister when no one is about, and who calls me Edward every day of my life. Because Jane is the only one in this whole entire book that has ever called him Edward. Because she truly knows him. And he has never been known in that way before. So, y'all might come for me, but is it bad that I like the final sentence of this book better than the actual final sentence in Jane Eyre? Because that's low-key how I feel. I really loved this novel personally. I really got into the story. I really liked the thoughts that this author had about Edward Rochester's point of view and the elements that she added into the story. I appreciated, of course, that she didn't reiterate a lot of Jane Eyre. And I do think people may be kind of on the edge of their seat to like when this book is going to get to Jane, because it does take a long while to get to Jane, and there's not a lot of her in the book. There's enough of her in this to like justify it being a Jane Eyre related novel for sure. So definitely you want to enter Mr. Rochester with an interest in like learning an author's perspective on what Edward Rochester's like history and perspective is. I would definitely recommend this novel if you really want to dive into the psychology of Mr. Rochester in particular, but I would just say characters and relationships in general, and how different kinds of characters interact with each other, and how some choices are kind of morally gray and some choices are based on desperation, or choices that are based on just also, you know, your feelings about yourself. I think that is a big element of this story as well. And I really like stories like that. Like, I like stories that explore, like, different choices and why characters make those choices. And I think this book does that particularly well. It does kind of explain in a little more detail the cultural experience of Jamaica. So I would actually kind of recommend reading this book maybe before you read White Sargasso Sea, because it does kind of explain some of those cultural things, whereas White Sargasso Sea uses a lot of context clues for those elements. So if you think you'll need a little more explanation and you don't want to read Spark Notes, you might want to pick this up first for solely part 2 to like kind of get what that dynamic of what's going on with some of the cultural experiences is. That's just an odd note that I made in my head about it. So I decided to give this book a 5-star rating because I super enjoyed it. I also think that it covers a lot of concepts really well, and also the end was kind of super cute. This time to announce what the next book I will be reading for the project is, and that book will be the first book in the Thursday Next series, which is called The Eyre Affair by Jasper Fforde. Now, this one should be an intriguing one if you decide to read along with me and pick up this book as well, because Jane, from what I can expect from this, will be very much a side character, a plot device, if you will, in this story, because it is more of an alternate timeline, sort of science fiction mystery kind of novel based around a character named Thursday Next, who has to, I think, find Jane Eyre because somebody has stolen her out of the novel. I'm pretty sure that the next one will be a spoiler-free vlog, just because I can't see myself like diving as much into like the characters from Jane Eyre in that one. So if you're looking for a spoiler-free vlog, I think that one's going to be the ticket for you, the next one. And that is it for today, my fabulous peeps. I will see you all soon. Thank you for watching. Bye.